Alrighty.
Hi, Jiro.
Hi.
Welcome to the Superfeeds podcast.
Thank you so much.
Guys, my guest today is Jiro Taylor. He is one of my dear friends, and he's also the founder of Flowstate Collective. He's the host of the Flowstate Collective podcast, and his community is one full of flow seekers, entrepreneurs, and adventurers. He coaches entrepreneurs privately, and he uses the framework of flow to help them optimize their performance and their potential. He also has this amazing business where he gets to take people on retreats globally, which is really exciting. And he focuses on giving his guests on his retreats the opportunity to actually experience flow and adventure in practice. He also helps to open their minds through spiritual practice and plant medicine. And I'm so excited to have him here today. Thanks for joining us, Jiro.
My pleasure, Tahnee.
Yay. So, Jiro, I want to start just by maybe introducing you to our audience. Do you have anything you'd like to share in introduction?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction that you made for me. It's always less awkward than introducing yourself. Someone else does that for you. So yeah, I mean, you hit the nail pretty much on the head. So I guess just to tell a little bit of story, it is always nice to frame, to contextualize the present moment reality that you described quite well. It was back in 2008 where I was living a life where I was optimizing for external validation and success. So just the traditional thing: let's chase as much money as I can and be as secure as I can, and give myself as much material comfort and choice as I possibly can. And I was doing pretty well at that game, to the point where I was a 25, 26-year-old earning like a lot of money, more money than I could actually spend. But I was actually increasingly anxious and stressed out, but way beyond stress. There was like this kind of shame thing coming up. There was like this really strong self-loathing pattern that started to emerge, because every day I was showing up pretending to be someone who gave a shit about stuff that I really didn't give a shit about, and wearing this mask of like, I'm the corporate dude who really cares about this sort of stuff. So it was the exiting that world and deep existential crisis, because everything that I had learned would bring me meaning, success, and happiness I had achieved, and it did not give me meaning and happiness. So there was like this, like I went on my own man's search for meaning, and I remember like lying on my couch in Hong Kong, just thinking, well, how do I orient this? Like, I didn't have any teachers or mentors or any particularly wise people that were putting their hands up to guide me at this stage in my life, right? So I was like, well, why don't I just think about the things in my life that have felt most meaningful? And the things that felt most meaningful were these various peak state experiences that I had. And some of them were just like cuddle puddles in nightclubs when we were all like really high on MDMA. And you know what I mean? And
I do, unfortunately.
Yeah. And some were more profound, like walking in the forest alone and dropping into the resonance with nature. Other experiences were like surfing experiences, snowboarding experiences, meditation experiences, and I was like, I'm just gonna like try and see what happens if I orient my life. I design my life to maximize for those experiences. Let's just see what happens if I just have as much and many of those experiences as frequently as possible. So that's what I did. So I did it for 2 years. I left the corporate world and I just went on this like adventure to try and have as much experience, as much flow as I possibly could. And it turns out that's a good way to live.
But tell me, you didn't know it was flow at that point, right?
No. I was like, I didn't have any vocabulary for it. No, you're right. It was like, I'm going to do the shit that makes me feel awesome. You know?
Yeah. So it was kind of this like innate search for meaning. And in that, it was sort of guided by feeling good, I suppose.
Aliveness.
Yeah. And okay, so a sense of aliveness, because that's, I think, a distinction that's really important is people often think, when you're searching for meaning and searching for something meaningful to do with your life, it has to feel good all the time. But my experience has been often the meaningful things can be challenging, but the reward is also really kind of profound. and the feeling of feeling good that comes with that is actually more of this like contentment and like satisfaction, so much beyond feeling, say, good in a nightclub or the kind of bliss seeking that we can sort of end up chasing. Do you relate to that?
Well, absolutely. And let me just explain that this like revelation I had in terms of navigating my life to achieve maximum flow state is certainly not the way, right? That was just like part one.
Well, it's a way.
It's a way, but essentially you're still locked into a cycle of chasing something, right? It was a doorway for me to walk into and to realize that there were these things called states of consciousness, and I had some kind of agency over my thought patterns, my behavioral decisions that manifested in an inner state of being. And so that was the breakthrough, right?
And that's power, right? Like once you realize you're in control.
That's ultimate freedom, but it took me a long time to actually understand. Like I spent that period of time where I left Hong Kong, I was freedom chasing in the classical sense of I'm going to leave relationship, I'm going to be financially independent, I'm going to be a digital nomad, I'm going to be able to like work from my laptop by the side of the pool.
Fit my life in a backpack.
Totally. And I was chasing all these like concepts of freedom. But essentially it's kind of all an illusion. Freedom's like this inner capacity to choose one's attitude in any given state of circumstances, to paraphrase Viktor Frankl. And
legends.
Absolute legend of flow, legend of freedom. The dude who like figured out how to be in flow whilst in a concentration camp. I think he knows a thing or two. But it was realizing I went through this phase of my life where I was just chasing peak states. So this was like, okay, I'm going to do this extreme thing, and then this extreme thing, and then I'm going to learn this extreme thing. Then I'm going to do the plant medicine extreme thing, and then I'm going to do the Vipassana extreme thing. And then you're kind of like living life like this. It's like you have these like peak states, and what comes after a peak state? Like
a peak crash.
a trough. It's like the reality is in the name. If you're like optimizing for peak states, you're basically also optimizing for troughs, for deep troughs. So it took me a few years of being on that hamster wheel.
Of troughing.
Of peaking and troughing and peaking and troughing. Before I realized that it's the evolution from states to stages. Right? So state is by very definition a temporary
finite thing.
Whereas a stage is a more permanent, enduring level of maturity. But the beautiful thing about states, if you have the awareness to draw the wisdom from them, right, is that you can be in this deep state of flow or euphoria or bliss or transcendence or whatever it is, and you can pull out the lessons, you can get messages, you can like figure out what is this a fractal of, like what is this thing that's happening, like what is this macrocosmically. And that's for me how the next stage of my evolution was drawing from that and realizing that the flow state experience, the one that neuroscientists talk about and we'll talk about now, it's very potent, very interesting, and there's lots to unpack there. But really, it's not about doing shit good and in the moment. Like that's just such a like small scale understanding of it. It's that flow state experience is like a fractal, a glimpse of the macrocosmic life in harmony with the universe. Right? That the Taoists have been talking about for yonks and yonks and yonks. So that was the journey to sort of figure out. And now what I do is I help, just to finish this introduction sequence that we're still on. I help people learn the techniques and tools and natural technologies and have the transformational experiences themselves so that they can go through that process themselves of evolving from optimizing for states to the stage of what I call flow consciousness, which allows you to just navigate all of this, right?
Because I think that is the distinction, right? It's the amount of awareness or consciousness you can bring to the state to enable the lessons to become something that you can take away and integrate into your daily existence, right? So I think it's like, instead of, because what I see a lot with people who become in the peak and trough mentality is that they are addicted to the highs and the lows, and the integration time or the ability to maintain a certain amount of distance within the flow state or within the peak experience moment to sort of be aware enough to take the lessons home with them, that's sort of lacking. Would you agree with that?
Fully.
We've observed that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a trap, especially in this kind of like it's happening a lot in New Age and spiritual communities of like there's this trap of like, and in a lot of plant medicine sort of situations. And I've just been on an experience in Costa Rica where there's 150 people all experimenting with all sorts of stuff, and it's like there's actually this kind of like seduction to be like in this ethereal state of higher consciousness all the time. And it's like it's almost like these flashes, these words of like tantra and goddess and shakti, and all this, they're like sucking people towards this elusive place, but it's actually kind of ungrounding. It doesn't encapsulate the totality of this human experience. You know? Like the actual like the beauty of it in so many ways is the blood and guts of the and the mud of the grounded experience, you know, so it's not about like escaping suffering or stopping the pain or being happy and positive and shiny and such a high consciousness goddess all the time. It's actually, I mean at its deepest level it's realizing that you are God itself, but you know what I mean? But
yeah, for sure, you're a condensed form of what is spirit, you know, like all of us, everything. You and I have spent time with rocks and trees, and you know, they're no different from us.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I feel like that's a really interesting, because when I think about flow states and like the science of flow, you know, the very, and I hope you can maybe share a little bit about what you know about this, but the kind of the nature of it is that it's sort of beyond that rational mind. It's sort of shuts off, from what I understand, the kind of prefrontal cortex, so the kind of rational, logical mind, and it does send you into this really beautiful and open kind of space of direct connection or transmission to source, or whatever you want to say. It's very much like, you know, a very creative space. And so Csikszentmihalyi, who I know influenced you heavily, like I studied him at university in a creativity course, like program that we were doing as part of my journalism degree. And, you know, his work to me was really profound in that he kind of actually, it used to be that, you know, we thought of creativity as this kind of mythical beast that, you know, only certain people were blessed with and all of this. And his work really shows that anyone can access this if they understand and are able to kind of bring in and cultivate and foster these states within themselves. So is that something in terms of your work that you kind of do and in your personal practice now?
Yeah, for sure. I'll unpack some of the flow state stuff if you like the science of it, so that listeners can understand the connection between this state of consciousness and creativity and expression, because that's really one of the really powerful nuggets about flow states. So this psychologist, I have it on good authority that we say his name, chicks send me high. Like that's his joke. He's like, chicks send me high.
Chicks send me high.
Yeah. So he's like this legend who in the 70s he was one of the grandfathers, the forefathers of the positive psychology movement. And up until that point, all psychologists, you could not. There was not this thing where you would look into like happiness or motivation or drive or flow or things like that. No. Let's look at schizophrenia and psychosis and suicide and anxiety. So this was like a bit of a revolution that was going on in the 60s and 70s. And he actually like led this humongous study in terms of the numbers of participants in it, and they used this technique called the experience sampling technique, where a whole bunch of people, many thousands of people, wore a pager. Do you remember? If you remember what those things are, they they buzz you at random points in the day, and at these times where these people were buzzed, they had the obligation as a participant in this study to just check in quickly and write down what they were doing and how they felt, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about like thousands of people over a significant period of time, all putting in this data about how they feel when they're doing different things, what you're going to get back is this very, very interesting data set drawing parallels between activity, quality, like the type of activity that we're doing, and how we feel in relation to the quality of the activity that we're doing, or the immersion in the activity that we're doing. And the results were groundbreaking, because prior to this, it was assumed that happiness and contentment and peak states of being were derived from things like safety and security, like very bottom level Maslowian kind of like stuff, right? Surely, if you're safe and secure, and you got your feet up on the couch and you're watching the Cosbys, you're going to be like really happy.
Super happy.
Yeah, surely. But it was proven that not only is that completely false, but like TV and kind of like apathetic kind of stuff, like doing not much or having not much direction, is actually like the biggest catalyst for lower levels of consciousness or unhappiness, discontentment. So it was very groundbreaking, because there was all of a sudden this connection between the quality of consciousness. And Csikszentmihalyi said, one of his pithy quotes is, quality of consciousness determines quality of life, right? And that's if you unpack that, that's a completely spiritual statement, right?
Well, that's Buddhism, it's yoga, it's Vedanta, it's early Christianity, it's
totally. It's all a mystical
pre-religion.
Yeah. But all of it. But this is an establishment scientist, an academic, with scientific words and frameworks and connections with the neuroscience department over there, basically coming out and saying, "Oh, hey guys, we got it all wrong. Our culture is completely like us about face. It's not the outside; it's the inside that affects the quality of our life." And that was a groundbreaking moment in our Western civilization. But in a sense, it's kind of like so basic for anybody that comes from the East, or anybody that like is versed in those Eastern philosophies or any mystical tradition, like you said. But there is like a level of profundity that was brought in by the precision and the academic tools that were able to be unleashed on the study of this inner state of consciousness, right? And so if we fast forward like 20, 30 years from that first study, we've now got massively well-funded universities, teams, companies, organizations that are fascinated by flow states and other altered states of consciousness, because there's now like a complete, total understanding that this is a dimension of our human experience that leads to the flourishing of everything that we want in life, right? So in a nutshell, I'll stop there for a second in case you've got any questions emerging, because otherwise I'll just flow.
Well, I'm kind of interested to kind of talk about the sort of more modern findings, because I know that it's a tiny tangent, but they've been talking a lot about this kind of new states of brain waves that they're finding and stuff like gamma waves, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that like beta is kind of your sort of base, like primal kind of brainwave state. It's just like basic function. And then your alpha state's sort of your flow state. Is that typically correct?
Alpha theta state. Yeah, the borderline of alpha and theta is what they call flow states. Yeah. Yeah.
And so as like when we're talking about kind of inhabiting, because it's all about frequency, right? At that point, like that low vibration is kind of those beta waves, and those like really high, fast frequency ones are the gammas, as far as I'm aware. Yeah. So when we're looking at, like, say, Csikszentmihalyi's work was more about self-reporting and that kind of thing. But when we're actually, like, examining the brain physiologically, are we starting to see, like, that if we cultivate these brain states or these kind of alpha theta states that we move, like, is gamma, because I know gamma comes out with, like, really intense meditation and, like, really deep states of almost, you know, potentially very, very heightened states of awareness. Yeah. So what my question is like, if we're cultivating flow regularly, are we finding that we're starting to see, like, literally, like, the vibration of the person's brain shifting higher regularly, or is this kind of, like, shown in science, or is this something that's just theory at the moment? Or?
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, you're right. So we have, like, so beta brainwave state is you just made me realize something that's very ironic about our culture, but we call this, like, normal, like other people call this
normal.
Yeah. Like normal waking state consciousness. But I just had this drop in. I was like, this is not normal. Like beta, like so beta is like when we're is like thinking, problem solving consciousness, right? Yeah. It's like, how do I make this axe chop down trees? How do I build a bridge? How do I plan? How do I construct a sentence?
How do I get my next meal?
Yeah.
Make my next dollar.
Yeah. And then as that slows down, we have alpha state. And alpha state is commonly regarded with, it's commonly linked with flow states. And then we go into theta state. Theta state is sort of connected with deeper, sort of getting closer to delta, right? And then we get into delta, which is like full sleep state, right? So you got this, like, this area between beta and delta, which is alpha and theta. And the interesting thing, like, there's this borderline between alpha and theta state, which when just like when you're just at the right frequency, there's like this pairing. So like when you're in that state, that's when gamma is often seen in the brain. So gamma brain waves have like this connection with getting into that alpha theta borderland place. Yeah. So in terms of your question around, is there scientific evidence to prove that the more that you practice, the more that you achieve flow states, the more that you exist at high frequency states of the brain? I'm not actually aware of studies that proves that, to be honest. I'll talk a little bit more about meditation studies soon.
Well, that's what I was kind of thinking about, because I know with meditation, it's been proven that it alters the brain physiology, it alters the parts of the brain that are active, it alters the states of the brain and the waves, and it moves you more into those alpha theta states, same as flow. And to me, really, flow is kind of like mindfulness in action, right? It's like moving meditation, or it's that ability to be so present to your experience that you're unaware of the kind of day-to-day minutiae that runs through the brain, you know. And actually, in that story you tell, I remember you called me after being in Japan one time. I think we spoke on the phone, and you were telling me about getting lost in the snow. Is that, could you just share that story? Because to me, that is like mindfulness in action and a flow state, right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So I haven't told this story in a little while.
Tangent.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. So basically I had this experience in Japan, and in Japan the snow gets deep, and we were like snowboarding. I was actually leading a retreat there, a flow state retreat in Niseko, and I was snowboarding with 8 friends. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the powder was like neck deep. And to cut a long story short, I got completely lost, and I spent the next 4 hours completely not knowing if I was going in the right direction, unable to move more than like a couple of meters every 15 minutes or so because the snow was so deep. I felt like I was drowning in this stuff. And there was this very visceral experience of shifting from absolute fear state to absolute pure flow state. And I remember it so clearly. I was like in this riverbed, like just feeling like more vulnerable than I'd ever felt in my life. And I was praying to God. I was like wishing for my mother to be there. My bowels wanted to empty themselves. I was so nauseous, like I nearly puked. Like it was just complete fear. And I was like full on panic state, just like adrenaline just coursing through my body. And I needed that to happen. Like, it was a processing that was going on. I was crying, I was screaming, I was like praying, all at the same time. And it was like it cut through, like it catalyzed an inner shift. And to be honest, I faced up to dying. That was what I needed to do in that moment, right? I had to face like the actual concept of this might be my last day, and once I had faced that, in other words, once I had surrendered, right? This is like this story, as all stories are, is like a microcosm of a macrocosmic reality. But once I had surrendered, there began to emerge this just letting go of the fear, just melted away, and there just emerged this kind of like playfulness, this joy, this like, oh my God, yes, okay, I've made peace with the fact that this is it, that this might be it. So let's just live. So and the next hour and a half was like one of the most profound peak state experiences of my life. I was like belly crawling through the snow, not even knowing if I was going in the right direction. Light was falling. It's -2 degrees, but it's beautiful. Like, it's absolutely beautiful. No one can hear me. I'm alone. Like, I'm shouting out, and the sound is just getting muffled by the thick snow building up on the trees. Every now and then, I just hear this, whew, as like snow falls off these overweighted branches. Yeah, and I'm just sort of like in this transcendent state where I'm just like overflowing with euphoria and bliss and happiness, right? And I'm singing to myself and like doing mantras and saying, I'm going to get to that tree, sit down and rest. And when I sat down at that tree, I'm just like so proud of myself and filling myself with joy and love and high fives and sort of like hugging myself for just being alive and being awesome. And that was my reality for like an hour and a half until I heard the like clunk, clunk, clunk of the chair lifts. And I was like, oh, I've made it. And that evening, I got back to the chalet. My friend, they were there mobilizing like dog teams and search teams and shit like that. And like I just collapsed on the floor crying. But that night, because this was a part of a flow state retreat, it was the talk that I was scheduled to give. Was like fear and flow. Like that was, and it was like, what an amazing experience to actually like taste that transition from absolute fear to absolute flow. Like, and like if the technology allowed for me to be hooked up to sensors, to fMRI scanners on my brain, like when I was in that panic state, you would have seen an extremely high frequency, right? I was like completely dominated by thought. It was like the thought of dying, the thought of uncompleted projects, the thought of the pain that my wife and my mother and my father would feel, the thought of regret, the thought of like how would my ending be, just thought. And like the surrender point would have manifested on this computer screen as just like this slowing down, just like this calming. What you would have actually seen, and soon we'll be able to actually talk about this in concrete scientific terms, but what you would have actually seen was the shift from separation or dissonance to inseparation and resonance. So I actually shifted into a state of consciousness that was in resonance, in harmony with nature itself. Like those high frequency states are actually putting you out of the flow of the universe. They're putting you like, and so slowing them down, it allowed me to like the surrender process. And we talked about childbirth offline before. Like this surrender process, like you're stopping yourself, you're stopping your own ego from fighting that fight that keeps you from just being one with all, right?
Yeah, well, because I have a kind of a theory that where like consciousness vibrating so fast that we look like matter, right? So when we start to slow ourselves down and we start to return toward that natural state. And I think, because that's what I've always found confusing about, because the gamma waves are really fast. And I was kind of like, I find that a little bit interesting that they're associated with really deep states, because my personal experience has been that those deep states are very slow and fluid and almost liquid in their kind of quality. Like if you talk about a feeling sense, they're certainly not like the fast-paced, busy, rational mind. And so, that was kind of, I was a bit curious about those gamma states and whether they're, but you're saying them as states of transition is interesting.
I've got a theory about the gamma waves. Because you're right, it is kind of counterintuitive. You would assume that there would be this continuing spectrum of slowing down, right? But actually, there's this gamma ray, but it's occurring within an environment of alpha theta. So it's this gamma wave is contained within this space. So my theory is that once you achieve this frequency, right, you've basically, and only when you've achieved that frequency, right, you've opened up the possibility to experience this burst of this wave of interconnection, right? And my belief is that this is when the totality of your consciousness is coming online, right? All of a sudden you're not just relying on what some scientists call system 2, as in your explicit, your conscious mind, right? All of a sudden that gamma wave to me signals the possibility that it's like all systems go, subconscious, conscious mind integrated, access to all memories on, and possibly all access to interconnected unified consciousness on. Okay.
So all right, I'm a yogi, so that would be samadhi basically, and yoga talks about 4 states of mind, which are basically ego, manas, which is kind of like the primitive survival mind, chitta, which is like the memory bank thought mind, and then buddhi, which is like your higher state of consciousness. And basically when these minds are understood and then when they're unified, then you access your real state of being. And I think what I've observed in flow states is that that's kind of what's happening. Like you'll experience the ego and you'll experience fear, which is often memory based or from thought, not from actual reality. And you'll experience those kind of, primal needs of the body and the human organism. And then you'll have this kind of intuition or guiding voice, which is wiser than you tend to be. And there's sort of a unification that happens in that, where there's these moments where you are like you say, just plugged in. I think plugging in is one of the best analogies. I always think of Avatar, it was a funny movie, but that plugging in, it's that's one of the best analogies I've ever seen for my experience in flow state. And would you?
I feel it as a opening up of the channel, right? So plugging in is a beautiful analogy as well, but I view it as that our physical bodies are in a sense tubes or conduits, like the trunk of a tree, right?
Well, they literally are tubes. That's what the Chinese anatomy says. You're just a bunch of tubes.
And just like this tube that we call the trunk of a tree, channels nutrients and all the good stuff from the roots and upwards, but also bring all the good stuff from the leaves downwards. It's we're suddenly in our bodies, in our systems, when we are in a certain brain wave frequency, all of a sudden all the distortion, all the kinks in the line are just and we're just this pure channel for it. And that's why it feels so amazing. Because we're literally plugging into pure life force energy. It's coming through us without the blocks and all that sort of stuff. That's the way I sort of conceptualize it or visualize it, or that's how it feels.
Yeah. And I know you have a background with meditation, and I mean, it's interesting because I've experienced when I've done a lot of meditation and a lot of, processes that access these states, I tend to find that my need for like food and like those kind of other forms of prana tend to dissipate. And usually that's also associated with things like breathing practices and stuff. And what you're saying is like, as a conduit to energy, it's like if you charge yourself in other ways, you actually, it's like you derive energy from another source that isn't really tangible. Have you had that experience as well? Because I remember you saying like your health wasn't so great when you were in like the kind of corporate world and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think now, like, obviously your health is improved. And I just wondered what you, like, if you had any thoughts on that, like how flow state allows you to better inhabit like your body and your experience and, all of those kinds of things as well.
All right, let's talk about that. That's like, basically, like when we're talking about health and unhealthiness, I think it's pretty powerful and clear that we've got to talk about stress and disease, right? Mm-hmm. Like what is it that manifests in the absence of stress and anxiety? Well, to me, it's the absence of stress and anxiety, and I'm talking about chronic stress here, right? The absence mm-hmm. of like long-term sustained stress results in like in so many ways and so many systems in our bodies it manifests as blockage. Mm-hmm. Instead of that like clean channel, it's like, there's all these kinks and blockages and stuff going on, right? And so you literally are untapped. You're literally unconnected to source. Mm. And so when I was in Hong Kong, I was 15 kilos heavier than I am now. I was, I was like usually like both drinking lots of alcohol and sticking loads of horrible white powder up my nose all the time, and sitting in front of screens under artificial lighting, going from skyscraper to taxi to skyscraper on repeat. That was my whole life. And yeah, I was so unhealthy, like so unhealthy. And the process of learning about flow states and then learning about this like more enduring stage of consciousness evolution was really the unraveling of all the patterns that manifest in stress and anxiety. And one of the most, there's been like hundreds or thousands of studies, scientific studies into meditation, but the one that always sticks with me and I feel is one of the more powerful studies is the one done by at Harvard, where they did that research group with people who were doing the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program.
I just was reading that one the other day, actually. And there's been 6,000 studies, FYI.
Thank you very much. 6,000 studies. Isn't that awesome? So this particular study proved many things, but two things that stick in my mind. The first one is that consistent meditation practice actually creates a physiological change in your brain, like a shrinking of certain parts of your brain, like the amygdala and
the fear-based
parts of your brain, yeah. So that's one. So the repercussions of that are that you are literally less prone to alacrity and shock and fear, and you're literally less sensitive to that, reactive, yeah. And then the second piece that came from that study, which I think is even more powerful, is that it was proven that consistent meditation practice led to increased functional connectivity in the brain. And functional connectivity basically means that all the different parts of your brain talk to each other with more elegance and more efficiency. And specifically in regards to this topic of fear and stress and anxiety, what we've got with the situation we've got going on, we've got this like fear center, like the old bit of the brain, the reptilian part of the brain, and then you've got like these newer parts on top. And if you first of all, you've got a shrinking of this part, so less prone to like flights of fear, right? And then you've got like this increased functional connectivity, which basically means these parts are growing into each other more, right?
Yeah, and getting denser.
And so for me, that means that the really intelligent parts here, like that our entire prefrontal cortex, like with all our powers to imagine and choose and project into the future and the past and all these amazing things that this enables us to do, it's literally like possibly the most high-powered thing that we know of in the universe, certainly on Earth. right? So all of a sudden that and the ancient part communicate in new ways. And I have felt this as I have increased and deeper my meditation practice. Like when I'm out in the surf, every year or so I'll see like something that's probably a shark, right? When I'm surfing, right? And like I actually can observe in my own consciousness the shift in like unconscious response to the threat. And what that means is that I still have like the moment of alarm. My amygdala still goes, brrr, but then online immediately is my prefrontal cortex and my ability to actually rationally choose a reaction, choose a response to that stimulus. And so if you extrapolate like that into life, right, you've basically got a new reality, a new level of consciousness that enables you to face the uncertainties and the quirks and the letdowns and the highs and the lows of life.
The suffering, right?
The suffering. But you're able to meet it with this presence. One of my teachers called it the sacred pause, like between stimulus and response. You're able to fill that pause between stimulus and response with something amazing, with a higher level of consciousness.
Even just awe and wonder at the response, like because I have the same thing. Like I'll get this really somatic experience. Like say someone like swipes past me in a car really close, or have some kind of thing that triggers that, and like I can feel this electric current that runs through me, and I can feel like my adrenaline kick in, and I can feel all of that, and yet I can stay really centered whilst it's happening. And there's almost just this like just this awe that this body is so incredibly wise, but you know, that I've also got the volition or the sovereignty to kind of to pick and choose. And I think it helps when you're like, when we're talking about health and things, I think people can get, you know, like stress just leads to this cascade of so many negative choices. You tend to want to numb yourself because, you know, it can be almost too much to bear to feel what you're feeling and all of these things. And that happens through food and drugs and all these patterns we like to choose. And it's like by starting to come back to like this body portal and this ability to tune into that, you know, that kind of immediate response, and then hold the vision, the wider lens. Like that's what I always like to think of it as. It's like, how do I widen my lens so that I'm not just focusing on this immediate thing, but, you know, holding it in a container. I find that a really useful kind of thing. And I know like flow state involves a lot of adventure sport and those kinds of things. And you just spoke of surfing, and my dad, I remember talking to him, he's a whitewater river guide, and he was the captain of the Australian team. So, and he's rafted like the Zimbabwe and, you know, all through Europe and America and South America. And he used to say to me, whenever I spoke about yoga and like these kind of peak states, he would be like, oh yeah, I get the same thing rafting. And as a young woman, I was always like, no, dads, like yoga's different. But as I got older, I started to realize that actually like we were talking the same language. It's just that his access to it was different. And that I was being very rude. But I think about that a lot because you know, growing up doing a lot of yoga, you can become that kind of like the patron saint of yoga, and you're trying to like convert everybody. And now I sort of think, there's like, you know, as many monks there are paths, you know, like there's lots of different ways to access this. And I know you came to it like kind of simultaneously through surfing and yoga, surfing and meditation, which I find really interesting. And I know, I'm just kind of curious as to like whether you think, I know you do plant medicine. I'm like, do you feel like all these things are necessary, or are they just kind of different versions of the same thing? Or, you know, like what's your take on that?
Yeah, interesting question. So is the question...
sorry, I could have probably been a little less waffly.
No.
I'm just thinking like, so for me, my original access to this stuff was like yoga meditation. I then sort of experienced... I've done, you know, adventure sports and things and had the same presence and the same ability to kind of tune in. I've done like creative pursuits and had this same access to this kind of state of flow. And then I've done plant medicines. And what I see is people tend to like get attached to the thing that gives them access to it instead of realizing that the thing isn't the thing. You know, the state is kind of what they're interested in. And I'm curious as to whether you think like, because for me, all of those things have given me a different understanding. But I actually feel that had I not done all of, say, the meditation first, I wouldn't have had the experience I had on plant medicine that was so profound. And I could kind of wonder whether you think that, you know, you can just go and do some adventure sport and you'll get flow state, or you can just go and do some art and you can get flow state, and it's going to be the same experience, or do you think they're all different, or, you know, kind of what's your take on that?
So I visualize like a spectrum, right? And on this end we've got complete domestication, right? And on this end we've got wildness, okay? And there's many ways to walk this path back to our sovereignty, back to our wildness, back to our original wisdom, back to our deep connection with this earth, right? And it just so happens that throwing yourself down a mountain on a pair of skis or a snowboard, or surfing a fast-moving wall of ocean, somehow like propels you into this state of wildness, because the neuromechanics of this are that your ego and your sense of linear time are completely put offline, so that you channel the existence through you, right? You actually like become nature itself. It's like you're so immersed in the unfolding of reality that's happening that you're just completely shifted along that spectrum from domestication, which manifests as control and addiction to choice and certainty, right? We want certainty and safety and control over here in domestication land, right? And all of a sudden we're just like propelled, launched to this place where we have no certainty, right? And that is wildness, right? It's just in a bottle, right? But that's just one way. Like the masters of the past, these ancient and wise and beautiful teachers, whose teachings now form traditions that we call yoga and Taoism and things like that.
Buddhism and stuff.
Yeah. These guys figured out ways to go from domestication to wildness. They use different language, but we've got Gautama Siddhartha dude, Prince in the like, thingy in the castle, saying, "Oh shit, I feel so unalive." He was basically saying, I'm ultra domesticated, right? I feel detached from the flow of the life, from the flow of the universe. I'm going to go on a quest towards wildness. Right? He didn't call it that. He called it a quest to understand the causes of suffering, right? Because the causes of suffering were domestication, right? So and
being aesthetic and all the things that you did, yeah.
And so he figured out this awesome way to rewild himself, called meditation. Right, and he figured out, and he created. I mean, let's not forget that these things are man-made creations, right? Mind-made creations. He created. But
there's science. There's a lot of these things, like they're replicable, and they, you know, have been shown to work. Yeah. But I think what happens is we apply these like dogmas on top of them, which tend to detract from their effectiveness sometimes.
Yeah, totally. But just to circle back on your question, I think like whether it's yoga, whether it's like adventure sports, flow states, whether it's like going really deep into shamanism or plant medicines, or even like I got friends who are like getting deep into the occult and magic and things like that, which is very interestingly is not what we think it is in the West. Like it's very interesting, but all of these are pathways to understand all the ways in which our minds domesticate us, right? And so, to me, like pick your pathway. Pick the pathway that leads from domestication to wildness, like the full rewilding of yourself as a sovereign being living this existence on this beautiful planet, and commit to it with totality. And as you commit to that path of totality, you're stepping up into new realities all the time. It's just like you're in the emergent flow of life, and then new pathways will come up, new teachers will come up, and then you'll look back one day and you'll be like, wow, seems like I've taken quite an interesting route. Yeah, it's been quite the adventure.
But you're kind of following the flow, right?
You're following the flow. But one thing, just to complete that point, is that following these paths without some kind of like meta awareness, which kind of we could call intentionality, or we manifests in a reality where you've got Red Bull athletes who probably experience more flow states than any human being on Earth, but they're 100% not more enlightened or more awakened than other human beings. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I often notice, like the surfers and the pro athletes and these people, they do tend, like the ones that tend to be drawn to meditation, it sort of always seems to be the unifying link, like, because I think it does foster in people this self-awareness and, like you're saying, that meta-awareness. And again, the studies show that it actually it creates that. It actually helps to strengthen that part of the brain that is able to be aware of the self. And I think, like, that's kind of something that I almost think you can't bypass. Like, there has to be a practice of introspection to some degree. And I think meditation techniques vary as to what works for people. But do you find that with people you work with and with yourself, like that there has to be almost a kind of regular practice of checking in with the self in order for these flow states to have meaning and to become things that move from state to stage? Totally.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. Like I feel like, see, flow states can be very accidental. You know?
Well, that's how most people, I think, experience them. It's like, oh yeah,
totally, yeah,
that was a flow state.
Yeah. Oh wow, it was amazing. Wow, time's just flown past, and like I was so deep in that chopping of the potatoes or whatever it is. But it's like the thing about meditation, the thing about what we call the practice, is that it's a disciplined and intentional approach to achieving a state of consciousness or connecting with the universe, whatever language you want to use. But what I'm talking about here is that it's the opposite of accidental. Right? So the power of that oppositeness of accidentalness is everything. It's absolutely everything. It's like it's us using our choice as beings to say, rather than going along with the cultural flows or rather than just going on with what I've been led to believe or what I've been programmed with, rather than just taking the path of least resistance, which is not flow, right? Contrary to what many people say and think, I'm just going to go with the flow. Actually, it's just like a emanation of fear that I've just pronounced, right? Fear of avoidance of something. Like, it's actually, there has to be implicit in it's like the action, the intent, the discipline. This is the yin and the yang. This is. You know what I'm saying?
Like, yeah, totally. I think that's such a I live in Byron Bay, you know, and it's such a kind of frustrating element of the conversations you have around here is how many people are like, you know, like whatever the universe throws at me, and it's like, take some fucking responsibility, you know, like start to stand up for, you know, and I remember I have had a really profound experience of this. I used to see this healer, and I saw her for about 5 years, and she was an amazing woman and in her 60s, and she kind of fulfilled this kind of elder role for me in a really intense period of transformation. And I would check in with her every month, and I was lying down on the table one day and I was just lamenting how my life was just happening to me and how I was, you know, always like given these opportunities, and I just felt like it was just, you know, I never really was choosing what I was doing. And she just was like, oh, get over yourself. Like, she's like, you are manifesting every single thing that's happening to you. You're creating it. You're choosing it. How dare you say otherwise? You know, and just kind of laid into me. And I remember lying back after that, and I just had this almost like this kind of like flashback of my life of like literally becoming aware, I suppose, of my sovereignty, of my, you know, ability to choose all of these things, and how I'd done it through, like, whether it was through apathy and not choosing, you know, like, or whether it was through actually, like, you know, pushing something else away in order for something else to move in. Or anyway, it was just this really profound moment, and I thought, oh, like, I think that's really one of the kind of key things that we aren't like educated about as children, especially like if you look at our schooling system, you know, it's kind of like you're always told what to do. You've given a set of rules, you know, you have to tick a certain amount of boxes in order to pass this thing. And it's like, there's not really much emphasis on cultivating that sense of self-awareness, you know, that meta-awareness, that ability to self-regulate in the face of fear, that ability, you know, and I think yeah. Do you find like when you're coaching people, like you're actually undoing a lot of like childhood stuff and like cultural stuff? And
massively,
all that kind of
and just the work on myself is all the undoing of that as well. Like what we've got to understand is that the programming runs deep, and like we're being conditioned the moment of conception. You know, we're absorbing the frequency of the universe around us from whilst we're in the womb. We're feeling everything. We're feeling everything. And one thing that I like to guide people into sometimes when I do breath work or meditation is just a guided visualization, and it's basically the remembrance or the imagining of waking up one day and you're a part of a tribe, nomadic, living in the jungle, surrounded by elders and people your age and younger, but just like tribe, right? And you wake up, you walk down, and you sit in a circle and you share your dreams, right? And you share your dreams, which form part of your waking reality. You walk into the forest as though you are one with the forest. You communicate with the trees. Your primary sense is what we label intuition, right? Or instinct, right? Synchronicity is simply reality, okay? Right? And the other thing, the thing that we call normal waking consciousness that we indoctrinate our children with from such a young age is simply a arrow in the quiver that they pull out every now and then when they need to think. And it sure as shit ain't all the time. It's like probably like, I don't know, 5, 10, 20% of life, less maybe, you know, when you're living like wildly and free. And I was just in Costa Rica hanging out with 2 brothers who are deeply on this path of remembering our original wisdom. And they've both been living on this land and basically just doing ceremony work all day long, right? They wake up in the morning, they go and wash themselves in the waterfall. They bless, they start praying for the land, praying for the water, praying for our ancestors. They live their whole life in this sort of ceremonial sense of like praying and giving thanks and gratitude. Right? This is their reality. And one thing that my friend, he's called Ryan Whitewolf, amazing young medicine man, he said, he just dropped into conversation casually. It was like, oh, I think, I haven't like thought in months. I was like, whoa. I was like, what? I was like, just the 30 seconds while I was walking over to see you, I thought about 1,000 thoughts, right? And I so sensed what he was saying was just like actual truth. He was living on this like felt, natural, wild, intuitive, interconnected, natural way of being, right? And so this is the path that I'm on. This is the way that if I want to answer the question, like what is my highest manifestation, or let's put it in a less spiritual way. What does peak performance really mean? Like what does to unleash my potential? What does it really mean? Well, it doesn't mean just getting better at thinking. Like it means like understanding the totality, the multi-dimensional intelligence systems that we have, right? And it means to like bring life and energy and awareness to all of these. And this is what I call flow consciousness. Flow consciousness is not just flow state, narrow. Okay, I'm going to learn to be like to have transient hypofrontality all the time. That's like the technical term for flow state. Flow consciousness is to have the ability to flow seamlessly, fluidly between various states of consciousness, right? So like when the situation calls for you to think, it's like, bam, think. When the situation doesn't call for you to think, stress or worry, we go back to naturalness and harmony and resonance. Yeah,
I think that's such a beautiful distinction, because I get a bit, I just can't really deal with the like biohacking, like brain hacking scene. Like it just, I'm like, because it feels so mental, and it tends to be, you know, masculine as well, and really like driven on like breaking all this stuff down, and like, you know, you take a dose of this and a bit of that and a bit of caffeine, and then you mix it up in a blender and you do this, and then you peak performance all day long, pump out this, and I'm just like, is that how people really want to live? And it doesn't really make sense to me, but I understand coming, like as an entrepreneur, for example, or someone running a business like we both do, and we were speaking about this before we got online, it's something I really struggle with still, is like, it's the transition. Like I find I have no grace in it, and I'm, I love myself, but I don't. And it was something I noticed when I taught yoga regularly, and I was trying to run my business, and I was running other people's businesses at one point as well. And I just found the sliding from like, frontal lobe to like open state of awareness and presence and beingness super difficult and super challenging. And I just wonder if you have any experience, because I know you coach like entrepreneurs and people who run big businesses, and you yourself do as well. I wondered if you had any like insight into what's going on there, if there's anything you do to help sort of moderate those transitions. Or
Totally. Good question. A big part of my coaching work is helping people achieve the wisdom to navigate those transitions with grace and ease. That's a big part of it. And I'll give you a quick example. It's a beautiful example that came through yesterday as I was speaking to one of my clients who's negotiating like a 9-figure sale of his company he's built in 3 years. Like, I'm not kidding. Like they think they can get $150 million for it. And so he spent the last week having meetings with really aggressive like finance people whose sole job it is to pick holes and find flaws and chip away at the perceived value of this company, right? And he's doing 25 meetings in one week with these like acquirers and bankers and private equity people, right? And I tuned in with him. We dropped in on a quick Skype call. I was like, how are you flowing? Right? How are you feeling with all of this? How are you navigating this? And he was so relaxed, and he was like, yeah, I'm just focusing on the quality of my being. And I was just like, yes,
it's working.
Yes, it's working. And so basically, he's developed like the tools, the mindset to understand that in the heat of the moment, in any sort of like high conflict, like high complexity situation, and especially dealing with other people's egos and fears, right? That's what's happening all the time in the business world. There's just like ego and fear all around us, right? It's like, what can we do to focus on our present moment state of consciousness, right? And we've got infinite power in that domain, in that quest. And so something that I teach all my clients is like simple breath techniques to completely change state. There's a lot of people at the moment talking about Wim Hof and these sorts of techniques, and which is great because he's bringing ancient
awareness
wisdom
to
the mainstream. But essentially, breath is life, and breathing well is to live well. And to breathe in a contracted or a weak way is to live in a contracted or a weak state. So the simple awareness of that is like a powerful foundation. And then to step onto that platform of awareness and to be like, okay, I choose to change my breath. I choose to like use my power as a being with choice to change my breath. And just taking a deep breath and exhaling it through my nose. Like the neuroscientists are just like, hey, look, we've just discovered that exhaling slowly through your nose creates a slowing down of brainwave states, and you slip into an alpha state, and you're like...
And your vagus nerve is stimulated, your parasympathetics engaged.
Totally. And it's like, oh, wow, you've just realized that? We can now start to believe that, and we can now start to teach that to executives and CEOs and just busy, stressed out people because the scientific study has just worked that out. Anyway, like... that's just the gateway, like looking at like the power of one conscious slow exhale, right? And like really like reveling in the potency of that act, and
the spaces in between. That's what I always find really like, if I learn to linger in between the breaths, like consciously, because it's I totally experience when I'm very mental and very much in my head, I experience a deep contraction of my breathing, and I always feel like I have to like stop, change my focus, like come back to my body, take a big breath, learn to get in a rhythm, and then I'll try and keep that pattern or that rhythm whilst I'm working. And I do that anytime I'm aware of it, I suppose. Like driving for me is a state where I immediately go into like this hyper alert, and to like keep the breath flowing and steady is like really important. But I notice if I drive really long distances, I start to lose the power of focus, and I'll like get all those stress responses like tight hips and all those things, which is really interesting. But yeah, I think that's that's such a practical and useful tool for people. I guess like what really interested me after I had my daughter was like, and I talked to you about this as well before, and especially after I've done both Vipassana and ayahuasca. After Vipassana, I went to pay for my petrol because my car had no fuel and I couldn't remember my PIN number. So I thought, oh shit, I better go and like log into my online banking and like get into my other card that I had in my car, like my credit card, and make sure that I have some money on that and pay with that. And I went back to my car, got my phone, couldn't remember my online banking, went back into the checkout person and was like, I'm so sorry, but I don't know how to pay you because I don't have any memory right now. Like literally, like it had wiped my memory, and it came back after a few days. I ended up calling like my mom, and she gave me her card and like whatever. But like, you know, if my phone hadn't stored their numbers, like I would have just been stuck there, you know. And similarly, after the ayahuasca experience, the first time I went, I came back and I couldn't like do anything practical. Like I couldn't remember how to get into my business's like online banking. I couldn't remember how to like log in and work out my website. Like I just had this complete bypass of that part of my brain, and it lasted about 2 weeks. And I ended up writing a whole lot during that time because it was like, well, I'm creative, I might as well just like hang out in that space. And you know, I wasn't a mother then, so I didn't have to worry about practical stuff. But yeah, and then after I had my daughter, I had a similar experience where I kind of was in this state, and I remember saying to Mason all the time, I was like, I can't think anymore. And it's not that I have baby brain, it's not that I'm not functioning, it's just that I can't like move my brain into these like logical thought processes that are necessary to create like a sequential series of events, you know. Like I even found things like making a tea or a smoothie kind of challenging, like and I remember that happened to me at ayahuasca. I couldn't remember whether the bag went in first or the milk, you know. And yeah, and I kind of wonder if you know anything about the science of that or what's going on with that, and whether you've experienced that in flow state, because that's something that I almost have a little bit of a fear around, is like I think I have a natural tendency to slide into those states really easily, and I'm like, how do I manage my like practical matters if I'm constantly like sliding into flow consciousness or something? And yeah, I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. So I just for the language that I use sometimes, depending on who I'm talking with, to describe like the two dimensions, right? And we could just use like conscious and subconscious, or we could use like thinking intelligence and feeling intelligence. But I feel that both of those sets of pairs of words kind of contain limits. So I prefer to use, we have this like mechanical capacity, right? Sequential, linear.
So right? Brain is machine or brain is calculator kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay. So
like the Western science model of the brain, you know?
Yeah, so the tea bag goes in first, right? And then the hot water goes in, right? It's like there's a mechanical kind of Newtonian thing going on here where there's cause and effect, right? And then, so that's one system, and then I am aware of another system, and so are you because you just described being in it, which is like quantum, right? And like in this quantum realm, the normal laws of like cause and effect and linearity
physics, don't exist. Anything,
they don't exist. Like it's all of a sudden it's quite a kooky, mystical place, right? That none of us really fully understand. Now, it doesn't I think like let's look at the universe in its rawest sense, and we have masculine and feminine, right? We have light and day, sun and moon, hard and soft, right? Yin and yang.
Duality. We're in a universe of duality. I think we can understand.
Yes, we can understand duality. So it's like if we're dominated by one part of the duality, then it's going to manifest in something that's kind of like the feeling of not being integrated and not being whole. You know, it's going to be imbalance, right? So, and that's on both sides of the equation. Most of humanity is unintegrated on the imbalanced on the mechanical side of things, right?
Yeah.
But like, so what I would suggest, or what I do when I'm feeling like, for me, when I feel unbalanced, usually it's on the mechanical side of things. So I will do practices that connect me with spirit, connect me with source, right? To like rebalance on that side of the fence. But if I was really unbalanced on that, oh my God, I just feel like I'm like this gloopy, interconnected amoeba, right, in this web of the universe, and I don't know whether my tea bag goes in first or not. Well, I would like ground myself in reality and I don't know, man. It'd be such an interesting study to like do this. Like, let's do Sudoku. Let's do some crosswords.
Yeah. Well, I actually love crosswords. Yeah. I wonder, because I feel like I agree with you. I got this really interesting, like Chinese medicine teacher say once that he thinks that whilst we are in a, like, so he's of the Taoist ilk, so he kind of thinks, yes, we're this duality, and that's kind of the I guess purpose of our being here is to like understand and integrate these opposing forces, and you know, there's a great F. Scott Fitzgerald quote that's like, you know, an intelligent mind can hold two opposing views at the same time, and I think like, to me, that's really what we're trying to do in this experience, is like, how do I be both a spirit being and a physical being? How do I be both a like mental person and like a feeling based person? How do I integrate these parts of myself? And you know, I think the yin and the yang is such a profound symbol for that, because it's like within that yin there's always the yang, and within the yang there's always the yin, and it's never truly like landing, like you're saying, a spectrum. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that we're always fluid between those two states. And I feel most out of balance when I'm ever too far in either direction, because I can definitely go too yang, and like Mace will pull me up on that all the time, where I'm like too mechanical, too kind of like process, and you know, and almost lose like that touch of like emotional, like empathetic intelligence that I have, but it's like I've allowed myself to slide too far into that space as well. And I think as a culture we've slid a little bit too far that way. But what this guy was saying was that he actually thinks that, you know, if you look at the cycle of light and dark in our culture, like you know, we look at around the kind of equator, we end up with like 50-50, so there's a lot more balance there. And as you move away from the poles, you end up with like extremes in light and extremes in dark. And he's like, our culture's kind of like the poles, like we're hanging out in like extremes, and so it's almost like, and I also look at where these like spiritual centers of the world are, and they tend to be close to the equator, and I wonder if there's some kind of correlation there between like literally like our pineal glands and how we're taking in like these like light and dark cues from our environments. And like, you know, because I find for me, like when I get outside, like, and I remember being with you on a San Pedro journey one time in the forest, and we walked under those power lines. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And we were both like, whoa, like, what's going on? And it was just this like total shift in energy. And I think, you know, that's kind of something, like you talk about living in Hong Kong in like a skyscraper, and like how unhealthy you became in that environment. And I think about that a lot in terms of like, in terms of our mental states, like what's happening to us when we're not exposed to natural rhythms, natural patterns, natural like, you know, natural energetic kind of imprints and stuff as well. And I know like we'll probably start wrapping up, but I just was wondering like if there's anything you wanted to share in terms of how because I know you were saying you sort of ended up in Indonesia for a while and you've moved to Australia, and I wonder, like living in a culture that is a little bit more westernized, like are there things that you find that really help you in like a daily practice, or something that kind of, you know, that you touch base with every day to help you remember that that kind of like higher Jiro, or whatever you want to call it.
It's interesting. Yeah, for sure. So like I'm a nature boy. Like the as we talked about, I lived in Hong Kong, which is like such a gnarly environment. Like it's first of all, it's mostly on reclaimed land, like made land where before was ocean by just dumping concrete in there. And then they built all these buildings.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's not even real land.
Mad.
Yeah, and then the air quality is like the worst in the world. Right, you're just breathing in the smog from Beijing factories. Right, and then there's like 7 or 9 million people living on a piece of land, probably like the size of like Byron Bay. Right, it's intense. So yeah, so I like coming to Australia and setting up my life and like just seeking out wildness and open spaces. Like I can actually feel the healing effect of being in places where I cannot see the hand of man, where I cannot see, like even I can't see any stairs coming down the beach. I can't see a pole that does signals and stuff, but where all I see is nature. I can actually feel that healing me on some cellular level, right? When I witness that, yeah. And so based upon that, there's a whole bunch of practices or habits or things that are just molded into my lifestyle, which is kind of like on one end of the spectrum, my life is going to Silicon Valley CEOs and helping them like remember what they are and remember what life is all about, so they can build companies of high consciousness that contribute to people and planet. But on the other end of the spectrum, I like to get in the forest and on the beaches and take all my clothes off and like build a fire, and which you've got to be careful of when you're naked, and and just rekindle this remembrance that lies dormant in my DNA that I am wild. And like every time I sit around a fire, especially when I sit around a fire with other human beings, there's like this collective remembrance, right? And it's like, and the way that this is manifesting, like on the surface, we feel like, oh, this feels nice. I feel safe and nurtured, and this feels really good. But on a very like microscopic level, I reckon there's like just like, I don't. This is not science. This is just me making shit up. But I reckon there's just like poppings of microscopic things in our DNA, just being like, remembrance, right? Of all that fire stands for in our lineage, in our timeline, or like safety and warmth and like food,
storytelling and sharing.
Yeah. And so
culture I believe there's some kind of like deep connection between, literally like how our culture evolved and that act of communing around something central, and fire and food tend to be, two of the big ones. And I think like this is a total tangent, but one of the terrible things we've done in this culture is, we've made energy like this commodity, and same with food. We've turned them into commodities, and we've taken away that like beautiful, that beautiful connection that we all feel to those really natural elements. So yeah, because if you think of food as earth and like fire as one of the elements, like I love that about the kind of Taoist philosophy, is how they acknowledge the role of the elements in our happiness and our wellness.
Yeah. Just this is just another tip or practice, but just like the concept, this is like a shamanic concept that actually feels really clunky and weird and awkward to the typical Western mind, right? But the practice of honoring and giving thanks to the fire, to the water, to the trees, to the earth, to the bird that flies above us, to actually like tune in and give thanks for all of these things. This is so antithetical to the way that we see ourselves in this sort of dominator role and separate from everything, right? But it's something on a deep level, something very magical and flowy begins to manifest in and I had a dream the other night. Like I often have dreams like this, but I had a dream. It was a very lucid dream where I was like part Aboriginal of Australia and I was part Aboriginal of North America, and I was just walking through the forest, and every single thing was communicating with me, from the caterpillar, the leaf, the sun, the birds. Everything was like in a constant stream of communication, and I was constantly communicating with them. Right, it's just this flow.
Non-verbally,
non-verbally, just through emanation, right? Just through the quality of my being. And that is like a way of living that humanity has walked or lived right up until agricultural times.
Yeah. Very recently. Yeah. In the
very,
timeline.
Very, very recently. Yeah. So,
yeah. There's this amazing book I read that speaks about how every morning so she went and lived with the Aboriginal Australians, the last nomadic group, and they hadn't really been touched by white people just yet. They were kind of on the brink of that happening. And she said every morning they used to gather together and give thanks and sing thanks to the planet and the earth and the trees and the animals, and they would ask for their needs to be met. And it was a surrender. It wasn't this like, I'm going to go take some meat now for my dinner. It was like, if there's an animal that's ready to die, we would be grateful to receive it, And she said, like, they would eat meat from, the dying animals. They would, select the plants that were ready to be harvested. And it was all through this act of gratitude that was sort of how they started every single day. And she also said that they walked completely silently, and they would all know, like, they would communicate with each other non-verbally, not through hand signals or anything. She would just be like, how did they know that? But that guy's gone over there and that guy's gone over there. And then they've suddenly just killed something. And just like the whole thing just happened non-verbally. And that just to me was like, because I've had that experience with, especially like with intimate partners and with my daughter, like people that I'm quite comfortable and close with. And also my daughter's non-verbal. So, and I'm like, it's such because I think we all have that ability to use those, like the mouth and the mind, they're so intimately connected, but it's actually a real barrier to our communication and our ability to like really perceive our environment and our reality. And for me, like shutting up more was something that really helped me to start to foster like those deeper states of awareness. So
absolutely. And one other thing that just popped up when you were talking there is when you're talking about nonverbal communication and telepathy and these like almost like primordial ways of being. But I was just thinking about this very simple concept, because I'm very undogmatic when it comes to everything, but and particularly around like food and the whole conversation around veganism, things like that. But one thing that I do that has been landing within me is, if I want to be wild and free and whole, right? Then if I view the universe as in this interconnected shamanic way, which can now be validated by science, then everything that I absorb, not just through food, but through conversation, through literature, if that
media, everything.
if that is a manifestation of something that is less than wild and free and whole, then I'm chipping away at my wildness, my freedom, my wholeness. And I just think it's so awesome what you guys are doing at Super Feast, and thank you so much for sending me the beautiful stuff, which tastes amazing. Like the way that the medicinal mushrooms, the blend goes into my coffee so well. It adds like this earthiness, this richness. I really like it.
I know. Yeah, they do. They connect you to something, and I think keep going.
Totally.
I think I know where you're going to say.
So this like coming back to like the brain, right? We've got to recognize that this culture that we're a part of, and we talked a little bit about how this timeline, this sort of diversion happened around the start of the agricultural revolution, and just accelerated vastly in the industrial revolution, and now in the technological revolution. But it's like, as these revolutions happen, right, our brains, are like, we still have complete control over the health of our brains, but there's so much we can do to nourish their health, right? And to recognize like the power and the importance of this organ through which our experience is filtered through, right? And just things like fats and having like absorbing the right kind of fats in the right quantity, and hydrating, and not just hydrating like
with actual real water,
actual wild water. Like these are the things that we have to remember if we're really interested in our potential and our performance. These are the base level things.
I know. Well, I find that, like, because Mason and I both started eating meat again after, like, I was vegetarian about 14 years. I had like a break at one point for health reasons, which didn't last. And I had this ethical dilemma when I was 14. I went to a school where we raised animals. We raised cows and cattle, and I just saw like the standards, and I was like, you know what, I don't want to participate in that. I'm a vegetarian. And then as I got more in touch with myself and my naturalness, I realized how important to be connected to actually the cycle of life and death is for me. And a part of that is eating from the animal kingdom and eating the flesh of animals and their organs as a part of my nutrition. But I hit this huge problem when I was like, you go and meet a cow and they're not how cows are. Like, they're domesticated and docile, and like, you know, there's this kind of, we kind of absorb that, and you're absolutely right. Like, but I also think the same thing happens with kale. Like, you go and see a monoculture of plants like living really sad. And, you know, Mason and I went to cacao farms in Costa Rica when we were there, and we were like watching these kind of almost decaying trees. Yeah. And the guy was like, yeah, they don't like being in a monoculture. They like being in the rainforest. And I'm like, that's like literally our whole food system is fucked, you know, and this is the challenge, I think. And like, you know, one of the ways Mason and I get around that is like we order wild meats, like game meats that are invasive to Australia off the internet, and we try and eat those in our home.
What website do you use?
It's called, I'll have to look it up. Give me a sec. It's called like Simply Meats or something like that. Okay. But I'll put it in the show notes, you guys. Yeah, please. I'm not going to remember it. Mace does the ordering. But yeah, they're based in South Australia, and basically they source from like Arnhem Land, Western Australia, and around South Australia, and they sell everything. They have the only license in Australia to sell magpie goose, which is an indigenous goose. But they also sell like boar, crocodile. We eat like emu. We also eat rabbit and goat and kind of all these buffalo, like all these random meats. So wallaby shanks are really good. We get those pretty regularly. So that's kind of one way we introduce that in. And another way is like wild weeds and those kinds of things. And like we've just been down in the Wollombi region learning about the wild weeds in that area, and a lot of those grow here. And I think that's why we're so passionate at Superfeast about de-Dao, which is the Taoist concept of like, you can't, like, if you don't ingest something that has grown in the land and had to have its own struggle and its own, you know, battle with the elements and its own kind of growth and evolution of consciousness, you're not going to have those same benefits, you know. And that's literally what our herbs are. Like, they're sourced in that way. And when we look at our food, when we look at our water, like, you drink water from a river or a spring or the rain even, it's like it tastes so different. And the frequency, the you know, the way it hydrates you, all of those things. So yeah, I think it's such an interesting thing because, you know, you talk about this moving away from domestication, and here we are like on a computer talking over the internet, like, you know, mind blown. But yeah, I find it's kind of like that yin and yang thing. It's like we have to be able to dance through, you know, these many different kind of ways of being in this world. And I don't think there's a right and a wrong way. It's just, yeah, it's a really interesting part of it.
But we've always got control of our state of being.
Yeah. And I think that's my Taoist teacher. He's hilarious. Like, he's like, you know, he's like, you know, I eat McDonald's sometimes.
Is this like, Mantak?
Yeah. I'm like, why do you eat McDonald's? And he's like, well, you know, it's like, it's just interesting to see what it does in me, you know, and he's like, you know, my body just now, it's like I don't take it on, you know. He doesn't get affected by that. He's like, you know, if you're walking around getting fucked up by the Wi-Fi, like, you're not strong enough. And you know, it's quite a hard line, but he's like, you know, if I'm in China and they're feeding me, you know, he's like, they're definitely not feeding me organic. It's usually got MSG. And he's like, I eat it, and he literally works to kind of transform that. And he's in this alchemical state of like, you know, he's like, nothing can get to him now because he's like practicing alchemy. And yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to start to think about, is like, okay, like, we all have, you know, I see people around here like, oh, I'm so sick and I'm so this and I'm so that and I can't do this and I can't do gluten and I can't do that. And, you know, I used to be like that, and I met Mason and he was like, oh, fuck off. That's like, you know, that's not a good way to live. Like, you're going to spend your whole life thinking that you're, you know, sick. Like, get out of that. And he literally just like told me to get my shit together, you know, and I was like, okay. And it kind of shifted my perspective on it. And I realized that, yeah, maybe that's not the story I want to be telling myself for the rest of my life, you know? Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
I think that's a very, very interesting point to wrap up on, is like this idea of like what empowerment really is. Like, and what you mentioned, alchemical or alchemy, and alchemy, magic, shamanism, these are all about transmutation, right? Like transmutation of matter. And yeah, I really feel like this is our capacity. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, what are we taking on? What story are we taking on? Like, these are all limiters, you know, to our wildness. I think you're absolutely right. So let's do another podcast on that.
Yay! Now, I just want to quickly, I know you have an amazing community, which, like, I know you work with very fancy people, but you also work with regular people. And so tell us a bit about that so people can find you where and how.
Well, none of them are fancy. They're all just
well, you know what I mean.
beings who poo and fart, and you know what I mean. I know what you mean, though.
We all poo, yes, we do.
So flowstate.co is the mothership or the website. And then there's the Flowstate Performance Podcast, which I've done 64 episodes, and I generally chat to
really cool people.
Just people who flow into my field, really. They're a mixture of, they might be martial artists, might be a neuroscientist, might be a psychologist, they might be an adventurer, it might be a regular Joe without any title who just comes into my field. But we explore flow in the practical sense of like real life, the concept of flowing in life, like. And so I did have a community called Flow Tribe up until 2 days ago. But I had a calling from the universe that wasn't the highest manifestation of my contribution. So basically, it's a very interesting story. But I had this realization, this breakthrough of what living in flow really is all about. And it's a very quick thing that I'll drop in here. But it's basically, flow equals service to the whole times radical commitment, full commitment. And as part of this radical full commitment, I've realized that it's actually a process of shedding, like what doesn't fully align, fully serve, right? Until you've got like this point that can go deep and penetrate, right? Because we're in a war of sorts. We're warriors of sorts.
Samurais, man.
We're samurais. We're Shambhala warriors, right? And we're our weapons are like compassion and wisdom. And I felt like the responsibility to, if I want to, basically, I had the very powerful realization that the highest service of myself is to work on a deeper level with entrepreneurs and change makers and people who are building some sort of movement and organization, and help them achieve the level of consciousness required for them to build organizations of a certain level of consciousness, so that these organizations become like leveraged supernodes of higher consciousness, and they can just channel out trust and love and wisdom and joy instead of fear and competition and scarcity and all that sort of stuff. So I've sort of like honed down what I do. But anyone can tune into the podcast. But these days I pretty much work with founders who are ready to step up in contribution. So
is that sort of framing business as a vehicle for transformation, like transcending the old paradigms of it needing to come from a top-down government approach?
Totally.
So
I see, like, the way, in very simple model, you could just visualize a tree with its roots and its trunk and its leaves. And the roots of this tree, of system, the world in flow, that's what this tree represents, right? And the roots are us. It's our shit, it's our work, right? It's how do we show up? How do we live in flow? How do we work on our whatever blocks our flow, right? And then the trunk is like this sort of the solid conduit of energy. And this represents the human artifacts that we've created that have an exponential effect on the flow of energy. And the most powerful of those artifacts in our timeline is called a business. And a business, especially a business with some sort of technology implanted into it, is like this. It's like this super hose of like it can fire out fear, it can fire out love, it can fire out anything, right? Depending on where the founder is coming from and depending what the culture of that company is all about. And so that's the trunk, and then the fruit, the leaves of this tree are how we're contributing to global systems that flow, political systems, environmental systems, social systems, economic systems, like flow economies, circular economies, gifting, permaculture. Like that's the work that I do is on all three of those levels, and it's first of all helping.
It's fractal, I suppose.
It's fractal. It's helping the leader, so the leader can build a high consciousness organization, so the high consciousness organization can contribute to the world our hearts know is possible.
That's the most beautiful ending to a podcast ever. Yay! All right. Well, I know we do have some amazing founders in our community, so I'll still put your details in our show notes. And I think Jiro's podcast is amazing, so check it out. And thank you so much for taking the time. I have a little baby that needs me, so I'm going to run. Can you hear her?
I can hear her.
Yeah.
All right.
Lots of love and talk soon. Bye.
Okay, bye. See ya.